We continue the Varieties of Religious Experience, a study in human nature by William James, by probably concluding lecture 20, Conclusions. It is in answering these questions that the various theologies perform their theoretic work, and that their divergencies must come to light. They all agree that the more really exists, though some of them hold it to exist in the shape of a personal god or gods, while others are satisfied to conceive it as a stream of ideal tendency embedded in the eternal structure of the world. They all agree, moreover, that it acts as well as exists, and that something really is affected for the better when you throw your life into its hands. It is when they treat of the experience of union with it that their speculative differences appear most clearly. Over this point, pantheism and theism, nature and second birth, works and grace and karma, immortality and reincarnation, rationalism and mysticism carry on inveterate disputes. At the end of my lecture on philosophy, about page 455, I held out the notion that an impartial science of religions might sift out from the midst of their discrepancies a common body of doctrine which you might also formulate in terms to which physical science need not object. This, I said, she might adopt as her own reconciling hypothesis, and recommended it for general belief. I also said that in my last lecture I should have to try my own hand at framing such a hypothesis. The time has now come for this attempt. Who says, hypothesis renounces, hypotheses renounces the ambition to be coercive in his arguments. The most I can do is, accordingly, to offer something that may fit the facts so easily that your scientific logic will find no plausible pretext for your vetoing your impulse to welcome it as true. The more as we called it, and the meaning of our union with it, form the nucleus of our inquiry. Into what definite description can these words be translated, and for what definite facts do they stand? It would never do for us to place ourselves offhand at the position of a particular theology, the Christian theology, for example, and proceed immediately to define the more as Jehovah and the union as his imputation to us of the righteousness of Christ. That would be unfair to other religions, and from our present standpoint, at least, would be an overbelief, or some would say an underbelief, because of the limiting nature of the Christian Trinity as compared to some ideas of divinity. But I list this book in the Jesus and Christianity section because it's, with exception to some side notes actually mentioning other religions, it basically covers types of Christianity, and isn't really so much of an approach to world religion, except by referring to Christians. We must begin by using less particularized terms, and since one of the duties of the science of religions is to keep religion in connection with the rest of science, we shall do well to seek first of all a way of describing the more which psychologists may also recognize as real. The subconscious life is nowadays a well-accredited psychological entity, and I believe that in it we have exactly the mediating term required. Apart from all religious considerations, there is actually and literally more life in our total soul than we are at any time aware of. The exploration of the transmarginal field has hardly yet been seriously undertaken, but what Mr. Myers said in 1892 in his essay on the subliminal consciousness is, come with their visions, voices, raptures, and other openings, supposed by each to authenticate his own particular faith. Oh, I skipped ahead. His essay on subliminal consciousness is as true as when it was first written, and Proceedings from the Society of Psychical Research, Volume 7, page 305. For a full statement of Mr. Myers' views, I may refer to his posthumous work, Human Personality in the Light of Recent Research, which is already announced by Messrs. Longmans, Green and Co. as being in press. Mr. Myers, for the first time, proposed as a general psychological problem the exploration of the subliminal region of consciousness throughout its whole extent, and made the first methodical steps in its topography by treating as a natural series a mass of subliminal facts hitherto considered only as curious, isolated facts, and subjecting them to a systematized nomenclature. How important this exploration will prove future work upon the path which Myers has opened can alone show. Compare my paper, Frederick Myers, Services to Psychology, in the said Proceedings, Part 42, May 1901. Each of us, in reality, is an abiding psychical entity far more extensive than he knows, an individuality which can never express itself completely through any corporeal manifestation. The self manifests through the organism, but there is always some part of the self unmanifested, and always, as it seems, some power of organic expression in the abeyance or reserve. Compare the inventory given above on page 483 to 484, and also what is said of the subconscious self on pages 233 to 236, 240 to 242. Much of the context of this larger background against which our conscious being stands out in relief is insignificant. Imperfect memories, silly jingles, inhibitive timidities, dissolutive phenomena of various sorts, as Myers calls them, enter into it for a large part, but in it many of the performances of genius seem also to have their origin. And in our study of conversion, of mystical experiences, and of prayer, we have seen how striking a part invasions from this region play in the religious life. Let me then propose as a hypothesis that, whatever it may be on its farther side, the more with which, in religious experience, we feel ourselves connected is on its hither side, and the subconscious continuation of our conscious life, starting thus with a recognized psychological fact as our basis, we seem to preserve a contact with science which the ordinary theologian lacks. At the same time, the theologian's contention that the religious man is moved by an external power is vindicated, for it is one of the peculiarities of invasions from the subconscious region to take on objective appearances and to suggest to the subject an external control. In the religious life, the control is felt as higher, but since on our hypothesis it is primarily the higher faculties of our own hidden mind which are controlling, the sense of union with the power beyond us is a sense of something not merely apparently but literally true. This doorway into the subject seems to me the best one for a science of religions, for it mediates between a number of different points of view, yet it is only a doorway, and difficulties present themselves as soon as we step through it, and asks how far our transmarginal consciousness carries us if we follow it on its remoter side. Here the overbeliefs begin. Here mysticism and the conversion rapture and Vedantism and transcendental idealism bring in their monistic interpretations and tell us that the finite self rejoins the absolute self, for it was always one with God and identical with the soul of the world. Compare above page 419. And one more expression of this belief to increase the reader's familiarity with the notion of it. If this room is full of darkness for thousands of years, and you come in and begin to weep and wail, "Oh, the darkness!" Will the darkness vanish? Bring the light in, strike a match, and light comes in a moment. So, what good will it do you to think all your lives, "Oh, I have done evil. I have made many mistakes." It requires no ghost to tell us that. Bring in the light, and the evil goes in a moment. Strengthen the real nature. Build up yourselves, the effulgent, the resplendent, the ever pure. Call that up in every one whom you see. I wish that every one of us had come to such a state that even when we see the vilest of human beings, we can see the God within, and instead of condemning, say, "Rise, thou effulgent one, rise, thou who art always pure, rise, thou birthless and deathless, rise, Almighty, and manifest your nature." This is the highest prayer that the Advaita teaches. This is the one prayer remembering our nature. Why does man go out to look for a God? It is your own heart beating, and you did not know. You were mistaking it for something external. He, nearest to the near, my own self, the reality of my own life, my body and my soul. I am thee, and thou art me. That is your own nature, asserted, manifested. Not to become pure, you are pure already. You are not to be perfect. You are that already. Every good thought which you think or act upon is simply tearing the veil, as it were, and the purity, the infinity, the God behind manifests itself, the eternal subject of everything, the eternal witness in this universe, your own self. Knowledge, as it were, a lower step, degradation. We are it already. How to know it? Swami Vivekananda, Address 12, Practical Vedanta, Part 4, page 172 and 174, London 1897, and Lectures The Real and Apparent Man, page 24, abridged. Here the prophets of all the different regions come with their visions, voices, raptures, and other openings, supposed by each to authenticate his own peculiar faith. Those of us who are not personally favored with such specific revelations must stand outside of them altogether, and for the present at least decide that, since they corroborate incompatible theological doctrines, they neutralize one another and leave no fixed result. If we follow any one of them, or if we follow a philosophical theory and embrace monistic pantheism on non-mystical grounds, we do so in the exercise of our individual freedom and build out our religion in the way most congruous with our personal susceptibilities. Among these susceptibilities, intellectual ones play a decisive part. Although the religious question is primarily a question of life, of living or not living in the higher union which opens itself to us as a gift, yet the spiritual excitement in which the gift appears a real one will often fail to be aroused in the individual until certain particular intellectual beliefs or ideas, which, as we say, come home to him, are touched. For instance, here's a case where a person exposed from her birth to Christian ideas had to wait till they came to her clad in spiritualistic formulas. Before the saving experience set in. For myself, I can say that spiritualism has saved me. It was revealed to me at a critical moment of my life, and without it, I don't know what I should have done. It has taught me to detach myself from worldly things and to place my hope in things to come. Through it, I have learned to see in all men, even in those most criminal, even in those from whom I have most suffered, undeveloped brothers to whom I owed assistance, love, and forgiveness. I have learned that I must lose my temper over nothing, despise no one, and pray for all. Most of all, I have learned to pray. And although I have still much to learn in this domain, prayer ever brings me more strength, consolation, and comfort. I feel more than ever that I have only made a few steps on the long road of progress, but I look at its length without dismay, for I have confidence that the day will come when all my efforts shall be rewarded. So spiritualism has a great place in my life. Indeed, it holds the first place there. Flournoy Collection. These ideas will thus be essential to that individual's religion, which is as much as to say that overbeliefs in various directions are absolutely indispensable, and that we should treat them with tenderness and tolerance so long as they are not intolerant themselves. As I have elsewhere written, the most interesting and valuable things about a man are usually his overbeliefs. Disregarding the overbeliefs and confining ourselves to what is common and generic, we have in the fact that the conscious person is continuous with a wider self through which saving experiences come, a positive content of religious experience which, it seems to me, is literally and objectively true as far as it goes. If I now proceed to state my own hypothesis about the farther limits of this extension of our personality, I shall be offering my own overbelief, though I know it will appear a sorry underbelief to some of you, for which I can only bespeak the same indulgence which, in a converse case, I shall accord to yours. The influence of the Holy Spirit, exquisitely called the Comforter, is a matter of actual experience, as solid a reality as that of electromagnetism, says W.C. Brownell, Inscriber's Magazine, Volume 30, page 112. And which that in itself implies that perhaps this Holy Spirit thing isn't a separate spiritual entity. It's like an awareness of your own aura or something. Of course, it varies what people mean, but the further limits of our being plunge, it seems to me, into an altogether other dimension of existence from the sensible and merely understandable world. Name it the mystical region or the supernatural region, whichever you choose, so far as our ideal impulses originate in the region, and most of them do originate in it, for we find them possessing us in a way for which we cannot articulately account. We belong to it in a more intimate sense than that in which we belong to the visible world, for we belong in the most intimate sense wherever our ideals belong. Yet the unseen region in question is not merely ideal, for it produces effects in this world. When we commune with it, work is actually done upon our finite personality, for we are turned into new men, and consequences in the way of conduct follow in the natural world upon our regenerative change. But that which produces effects within another reality must be termed reality itself. And so I feel as if we had no philosophic excuse for calling the unseen or mystical world unreal. God is a natural appellation, for us Christians at least, for the supreme reality, so I will call this higher part of the universe by the name of God. And transcendentalists are fond of the term oversoul, but as a rule, they use it in an intellectualist sense, as meaning only a medium of communion. God is a causal agent as well as a medium of communion, and that is the aspect which I wish to emphasize. That the transaction of opening ourselves, otherwise called prayer, is a perfectly definite one for certain persons, appears abundantly in the preceding lectures. I append another concrete example to reinforce the impression on the reader's mind. Man can learn to transcend these limitations of finite thought and draw power and wisdom at will. The divine presence is known through experience. The turning to a higher plane is a distinct act of consciousness. It is not a vague, twilight, or semi-conscious experience. It is not an ecstasy. It is not a trance. It is not a super-consciousness in the Vedantic sense. It is not due to self-hypnotization. It is not done to self-hypnotization. It is a perfectly calm, sane, sound, rational, common sense shifting of consciousness from the phenomena of sense perception to the phenomena of seership, from the thought of self to a distinctively higher realm. For example, if the lower self be nervous, anxious, tense, one can in a few moments compel it to be calm. This is not done by a word simply. Again, I say it is not hypnotism. It is by the exercise of power one feels the spirit of peace as definitely as heat is perceived on a hot summer day. The power can be surely used as the sun's rays can be focused and made to do work, to set fire to wood. The Higher Law, Volume 4, page 4 and 6, Boston, 1901. We and God have business with each other, and in opening ourselves to his influences, our deepest destiny fulfilled. The universe, at those parts of it which our personal being constitutes, take a turn genuinely for the worse or for the better in proportion as each one of us fulfills or evades God's demands. As far as this goes, I probably have you with me, for I only translate into schematic language what I may call the instinctive belief of mankind. God is real since he produces real effects. The real effects in question, so far as I have as yet admitted them, are exerted on the personal centers of energy of the various subjects, but the spontaneous faith of most of the subjects is that they embrace a wider sphere than this. Most religious men believe, or know if they be mystical, that not only they themselves, but the whole universe of beings to whom God is present, are secure in his parental hands. There is a sense, a dimension, they are sure, in which we are all saved in spite of the gates of hell and all the adverse terrestrial appearances. God's existence is the guarantee of an ideal order that shall be permanently preserved. This world may indeed, as science assures us, some day burn up or freeze, but if it is part of his order, the old ideals are sure to be brought elsewhere to fruition, so that where God is, tragedy is only provisional and partial, and shipwreck and dissolution are not the absolutely final things. Only when this farther step of faith concerning God is taken and remote objective consequences are predicted does religion, as it seems to me, get wholly free from the first immediate subjective experience and bring a real hypothesis into play. A good hypothesis in science must have other properties than those of the phenomenon it is immediately invoked to explain, otherwise it is not prolific enough. God, meaning only what enters into the religious man's experience of union, falls short of being a hypothesis of this more useful order. He needs to enter into wider cosmic relations in order to justify the subject's absolute confidence and peace. That the God with whom, starting from the hither side of our own extra marginal self, we come at its remoter margin into commerce, should be the absolute world ruler, is of course a very considerable overbelief. Overbelief as it is, though it is an article of almost everyone's religion, most of us pretend in some way to profit upon our own philosophy, but the philosophy itself is really propped up upon this faith. What is this but to say that religion, in her fullest exercise of function, is not a mere illumination of facts already elsewhere given, not a mere passion like love, which views things in a rosier light. It is indeed that, as we have seen abundantly, but it is something more, namely, a postulator of new facts as well. The world interpreted religiously is not the materialistic world over again with an altered expression. It must have, over and above the altered expression, a natural constitution different at some point from that which a materialistic world would have. It must be such that different events can be expected in it. A different conduct must be required. This thoroughly pragmatic view of religion has usually been taken as a matter of course by common men. They have interpolated divine miracles into the field of nature. They have built They have built a heaven out beyond the grave. It is only transcendentalists, metaphysicians who think that, without adding any concrete details to nature or subtracting any, but by simply calling it the expression of absolute spirit, you make it more divine just as it stands. I believe the pragmatic way of taking religion to be the deeper way. It gives it body as well as soul. It makes it claim, as everything real must claim, some characteristic realm of fact as its very own. What the more characteristically divine facts are, apart from the actual inflow of energy in the faith state and the prayer state, I know not, but the overbelief on which I am ready to make my personal venture is that they exist. The whole drift of my education goes to persuade me that the world of our present consciousness is only one of many worlds of consciousness that exist, and that those other worlds must contain experiences which have a meaning for our life also, and that although in the main their experiences and those of this world keep discrete, yet the two become continuous at certain points, and higher energies filter in. By being faithful in my poor measure to this overbelief, I seem to myself to keep more sane and true. I can, of course, put myself into the sectarian scientist's attitude and imagine vividly that the world of sensations and of scientific laws and objects may be all. But whenever I do this, I hear that inward monitor of which W.K. Clifford once wrote, whispering the word bosh. Humbug is a humbug, even though it bear the scientific name, and the total expression of human experience, as I view it objectively, invincibly urges me beyond the narrow scientific bounds. Assuredly, the real world is of a different temperament, more intricately built than physical science allows, so my objective and my subjective consciousness both hold me to the overbelief which I express. Who knows whether the faithlessness of individuals here below to their own poor overbeliefs may not actually help God in turn to be more effectively faithful to his own greater tasks. Well, I guess labeling that as an overbelief really makes sense.